Welcome back to the Locked On Atlantic Division Preview. I'm Ross Levitan alongside Brandon Pillar from Locked On Senators, and we are joined by Ian McLaren from Locked On Bruins. Ian, how are you doing today?
I'm good, fellas. How are you?
Doing fantastic, man. Hockey's in the air, so there's nothing better than that. What's the number one story at a Bruins training camp right now?
Oh, right now, it's been a bit of a slow burn to start things up. A lot of the veteran guys are, taking their time to get into it. Probably the biggest story is, Anton Strawman jumping in on a PTO.
Yep.
Whether or not Nick Foligno is going to be a contributor this season. And then some of the young guys trying to make an impact in some preseason games and try to maybe bump some of the vets off the roster and grab a spot of their own.
You think there's a chance Fabian Lysell sticks this year?
I would like to see it. I expect that he'll probably be in Providence for the season. He's got all the skill in the world. Needs to get more used to the pro game. He's only played in the WHL over here in North America. He's one of those guys that is eligible to play in the AHL instead of having to go back to junior hockey. Yep. So he could probably use a bit of a taste of the pro game and get more of that physical side of his game in check before he gets up with the big guys, I think.
Yeah, Pilsy, that's kind of what we wish the other Vancouver Giant would have had. Lysell was teammates with Zach Ostapchuk, Sens prospect last year, and we're like, man, the AHL is perfect for him. He's 6'3", 200 pounds. He doesn't need to dominate against 16-year-olds. So that's lucky that Lysell, because he was drafted out of Europe, can make the move after just 1 year. Bells?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, now, Ian, I think for everyone not inside the Bruins universe, non-Bruins fans, just in the hockey sphere here, everyone is kind of looking at this year like the last dance for the Bruins. You get Bergeron and Kreichi back in what can only be described as team-friendly deals. I had to double-check. I was looking for it on Cap-Friendly. I was like, wait, are they not signed? I thought they were. Oh, we just got to scroll all the way down to the bottom to see their salaries at very minimal contracts there. But what's the feeling like for Bruins fans? Like, does this feel like, okay, let's get the band back together, let's make one last push, and then we'll restart, rebuild, start things over again? Or is this just business as usual? This team's going to keep humming along here.
I'm kind of two minds about this. I think the real last dance was in 2019, to be honest.
Okay.
You still had Zdeno Chara in the mix.
Yep.
You still had Torrey Krug in the mix. Tuukka Rask. Like, that was the core, along with Brad Marchand, David Kreichi, Patrice Bergeron. So this is kind of a post-last dance, if you will.
The encore last dance.
Yeah. I don't necessarily see it as there's no guarantee that this is the final season for Patrice Bergeron. He signed a one-year deal. It could be a situation where he just, reevaluates after the season for the next couple of years. Reigning Selke Trophy winner, so he obviously has, a high-end game still there. When it comes to Kreichi...
do you laugh when every single year in the draft somebody's like, oh yeah, they're like the next Bergeron? Every year.
Yeah. I've heard that. You hear that every year. Anthony Cirelli and
Colin White, we had that for. I was like, ooh.
Yeah, it's there will never be another Patrice Bergeron unless, someone wins 6 Selke trophies. It's just unreal what he's been able to do in his career, and when he does move on, it's going to be a huge loss for the Boston Bruins. It's not something that you can replace. So every year that he is in the lineup, it's just something that Bruins fans need to cherish and hope that he can keep it going for one more year until it actually does come about that he announces his retirement.
Yeah, well, you've got 2 numbers going up in the rafters then, pretty guaranteed, 33 and 37 for Chara and Bergeron. Is there anyone else from this last, basically since 2011 when they won the Stanley Cup, that core's been together? Is there anyone else that you'd retire their number?
I've heard arguments for Tuukka Rask. He's the winningest goalie in Bruins history. Doesn't have the cup as a starter, which if they won in 2019, then he'd certainly be up there. You hear Brad Marchand, maybe David Kreichi. the thing with Chara and Bergeron is they both have the cups and they both have individual awards as well, which kind of separates them from the pack. Although Rask does have a Vezina to his credit as well. So I could see maybe Rask, but it's kind of borderline for Marchand and Kreichi as well. We'll see what David Pasternak's able to do over the remainder of his career. He does have a Richard Trophy. He's been to the finals once, so maybe he could be a candidate as well.
Yeah, and especially those two guys in Bergeron and Chara, like those were the cornerstones of the leadership of this Bruins era. So I think that's definitely important too. Now, I was mentioning I was on the Cap Friendly page. I'm looking at it right now, Ian. And the reason I kind of penned that question, is this the last dance, is because when you're looking at it, there are 11 players on this roster that are on 1-year deals. So for me, it really seems like the Bruins are like, okay, we'll put it all together here. And then no matter whether it works or doesn't work, we have a lot of flexibility to either re-sign a bunch of these guys or let a bunch of these guys go and start fresh. If they decided to start fresh, do you think a lot of these guys would be returning? Like, let's say this year doesn't go the way the Bruins plan, maybe a first-round exit, something like that. Do you think this is the time where they would shuffle the deck, I should say? Or do you think a lot of these guys, they want to keep back and keep the status quo?
I mean, that was one of the reasons why I was pretty sure that Bergeron was coming back this season, is because, last year they added a bunch of these kind of veteran guys on 2-year deals, like a Nick Foligno, Thomas Nosek, Eric Halub before he got traded. It really does seem, like if it doesn't work out this year, then there's a good opportunity to retool, rebuild on the fly, what have you. I could see a lot of those kind of non-core guys being moved out, being replaced with some younger options, or investing that money in some free agents. But I don't think it would be a situation where, they would, like, I know it happened with Zdeno Chara, where they basically were like, we're moving on. I can't see them doing that with Patrice Bergeron. As long as he and Kreichi want to play in black and gold, I think there'll be an opportunity there for them. But kind of those non-core guys like a Nick Foligno, you could see them kind of moving on and not being retained as Bruins next season.
So, Ian, we've had a lot of experience with this. So if you need advice throughout the season of how to deal with players in the final year of their contract and all the noise that comes around with it, we are your guys for that. However, David Pastrnak is no doubt going to get an enormous raise on the $6.6 million cap hit he's got right now. What's the vibe in Bruins land? Is he going to play out the season? Is he still negotiating? Where are things at with Pasta?
It's a situation, I think, where he is comfortable entering the season without a deal. There was some talk over the summer that he was maybe questioning the Bruins' future, like we were just talking about, what's going to happen after the season, with some questions of who he'd play with down the middle, if the Bruins can sustain the success they've had over the last several years. Ultimately, I think there's an appetite on both sides to get a deal done. He took a lot of time over the summer to kind of refresh physically, mentally. He had, personal tragedy before last season that I'm sure he's still dealing with. So it wasn't front of mind per se, but I believe ultimately it will get done. We're not going to see a kind of Johnny Gaudreau situation. And I think, he's going to become the highest paid player in Bruins history. I wouldn't be surprised if I could see a situation where it's like 8 times 88 to get to his number. So it's 11 per year. I know a lot of Bruins fans are hoping that it's 8 years, 8.8 per, which I don't think is really realistic. He's going to get double-digit millions for sure, and rightfully so. Charlie McAvoy set the standard for a new kind of deal in Boston. No longer those team-friendly kind of contracts that they got from their star players in the past, and he's going to get paid like one of the better wingers in the league, which he is, so rightfully so.
Yeah, he dummies Ottawa every year. It's 27 points in 21 career games against the Sens.
Yeah. special player for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when are Marchand and McAvoy expected to come back in?
So they are always have to differentiate. They're expected to come back around Thanksgiving, and that would be American Thanksgiving. So they're probably going to miss 6 weeks of the season. Hopefully they're back for the Black Friday game, which they always play every year. But it should be around December 1st that both of those guys should be back in the lineup.
I know as Sens fans we're feeling blessed that the home opener is against the Bruins without a McAvoy and Marchand.
Yeah.
Now, how kind of nervous are Bruins fans that maybe the start of the season they're going to fall a bit behind and they're going to have to play major catch-up here?
It's 22 games until December 1st, so that's a quarter of the season.
It's a pretty big chunk.
That's a big deal, yep.
So, of course, things can change, but on Wednesday, September 28th, it looks like the lines for the Bruins are Kreichi, Taylor Hall, David Pastrnak, Bergeron, Zaka, and DeBrusk, Coyle, Frederick, and Craig Smith, and then a fourth line, either Studnicka, Wagner, and Lysell, or Kopanen, Foligno, and Letteri. What's the one battle that you're watching through the rest of camp here, Ian?
That's I mean, the top 9 seems pretty set. There was a emerging guy that made an impact in a preseason game last night, which was the 27th against the Rangers. AJ Greer scored 2 goals, including the overtime game winner. He showed a lot of chemistry with Jack Studnicka. He's a second-round pick from 2015. Hasn't really caught on in the NHL. Played pretty well in the AHL last season, so that he could be a candidate to play on the fourth line at times. Goes back to that kind of Nick Foligno question. He's making $3.8 million this season. Do they give him the David Backes treatment and try to bury him in the minors? Do they try to trade him? It's a lot to play a fourth line guy for sure when there's younger options who might be able to contribute. So when it comes to the top 6 set, I could see Trent Frederick maybe being challenged by someone with a bit more offensive upside. Craig Smith has seemed like a trade candidate here for a little bit as they want to clear some cap space. And then the fourth line, there's like 5 or 6 guys who could play down there. So Don Sweeney's got some work ahead of him to try to manage the cap, maybe assign some vets to the AHL, maybe try to trade them before the season. But really, it's just the fourth line that has to come together at this point.
Later on, we're going to get Ian's sleeper pick for your fantasy team when it comes to the Boston Bruins. And for everything Bruins, make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Boston Bruins on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up after the break, we're going to discuss the Ottawa Senators and how much, if any, does Ian and us, how do we think they've closed the gap with that large spread of points between them this past season? Just a quick word from our sponsors. We'll be right back. This is a crossover edition of the Locked On Senators and Locked On Boston Bruins podcast.
BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more at BetOnline, where the game starts.
All right, you are listening to a crossover of the Locked On Senators and Locked On Bruins podcast. Ian McLaren with us. I'm Ross Levitan alongside Brandon Pillar. And the nation's capital has some excitement with the moves that Pierre Dorion made throughout this offseason. Pillsy, are they going to bite on the ankles of the Boston Bruins, or do you still think that's a pretty big gap after this summer?
I mean, that's what they're hoping towards. And like you mentioned, the slow start, hopefully, if you're a Sens fan looking at the Bruins, that they'll have with McAvoy and Marchand out, you hope to pick up some ground there. And it's going to be interesting because I think these are two teams that are kind of the Sens are trending upwards, the Bruins might be trending downwards, and they might meet each other in the middle somewhere throughout this season. So I think the battle between these two teams is going to be very interesting moving forward.
Yeah, one question I have for you guys is about the goaltending. You know, there's been a lot of switches around in the Atlantic Division. We could talk about the Leafs goaltending, arguably worse than it was last season. Cam Talbot, Anton Forsberg. We're going to talk about fantasy later, but in one of my keeper leagues, I had both Robin Lehner and Carey Price, who were both out for the season. I somehow managed to snag both Cam Talbot and Anton Forsberg, so I'm pretty invested in that pairing. Also have Mads Sogard as a keeper down the road.
Nice.
Just to hedge there. Do you guys see them being a tandem that can kind of elevate the overall team performance and maybe make up for some shortcomings on the blue line for the Ottawa Senators?
Well, my favorite stat with Anton Forsberg, and if you were following closely, which I'm sure you were last year, is that the more rubber this guy faced, the better he did. I think it was 8-2-1 in games where he made 40 or more saves, and he's going to have a few nights like that coming up. But it's almost in the similar vein as when Ottawa acquired Craig Anderson. It was a journeyman goalie who couldn't really catch on anywhere, although had a few good performances along the way. People in Carolina that we spoke to absolutely loved what his work ethic was throughout, but he just never seemed to get that starter's role. I think one year he had about 30 games in Chicago, but never really had an extended opportunity. Comes here off of waivers and was just unreal. So I think that if you weren't paying attention to Ottawa last year, and not you specifically, but the listener, you might be like, this guy's 30 years old. He's played 100 games in the NHL, if that. Like, they're going to rely on this guy with all these expectations, but to me, he's the starter. Like, I know it's a 1A, 1B situation, and Talbot's the more veteran player and all this. Similar upcomings, University of Alabama Huntsville for Cam Talbot. You don't see that with a lot of guys. I think he won 2 out of his first 20 games with them. But I just think right now you go with the incumbent, the guy who's gotten it done for you before. And then Cam Talbot is just an amazing insurance policy when you consider the previous option was Philip Gustafson, who I know Pilsy thought got a raw deal here, moving up and down from the minors. But for me, he just wasn't reliable to win games for you last year, especially. Pills, do you kind of echo that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the thing is last year, the Ottawa Senators had to rely on Forsberg. There wasn't another option. Matt Murray was off and on the shelf. You really couldn't rely on him to be healthy. Even on the day of, there was game days where he was supposed to
warm-ups.
And yeah, hours before the game, he couldn't go. And I mean, your health is your health, so we can't put too much blame on it. You can only do what your body allows. But
the best availability or best ability is availability.
Yeah, especially when you're looking at a starting goaltender. So it just didn't work with Matt Murray in Ottawa, unfortunately. And then Philip Gustafson, like Ross mentioned, I really think he didn't get the proper development path. He wasn't really given the best opportunities to succeed when he was brought in, and he just wasn't ready for that type of role that the Senators needed. Now, Anton Forsberg can be the guy, but he doesn't have to be the guy. You have Cam Talbot that is very comfortable stepping up and being the 1A if that's necessary. So for DJ Smith to now have 2 reliable veteran goalies that gives this team a good chance to win on any given night, that's a game changer for this Ottawa Senators team.
Yeah, agreed.
Speaking of DJ Smith, he's done a pretty good job so far with a young Ottawa Senators team. Is there kind of elevated expectations for him as a coach to kind of take his role to the next level, or is it a situation where perhaps he could be on the hot seat to start the season if this team kind of stumbles out of the gate and he's maybe replaced with a more established veteran head coach? Yeah,
it's a great question, and I was wildly impressed when I saw that. I'm looking for it right now with what was it exactly? Yes, he is the longest serving head coach in Canada right now, and crazy. He's like 7th in the league in terms of how long he's been there. And we know there's a lot this offseason. I think 7 new head coaches, so that accelerated this, but he needs a good start. And last year, November was a gong show for Ottawa. Not only they and the Islanders were the first 2 teams to really go through COVID with I think they had 14 guys in protocol at one point. I think there was a game against the Bruins, and Calgary was my favorite one. They got outshot like 30-11 and lost 4-0. And you're like, okay, like this would have been a bad lineup for Belleville, and we're playing this in an NHL game on the first half of back-to-back. But that's neither here nor there. Coaches, circumstances don't always matter. It's a results-driven business. And the last 2 years, first 20 games, 4 wins, identical. You just cannot have that. So you know what? That same time that McAvoy and Marchand are coming back, that's where I think the seat would get hot. If they haven't won, I don't even expect them to fly out of the gates. I think it's going to take a while for the chemistry to develop between Stützle, Giroux, and DeBrincat. That sentence is still wild to say. But I do think that you have to give those guys 10, 15 games where you just don't touch it. Just let them figure it out. They're veterans, at least the 2 wingers are, and Timmy's coming into his own. But with all that change, I think 25 games, if they haven't at least sniffed 500 as a record, then I'm looking to make a change. And the only question is, who's it going to be? If it is, because I don't think it would be a veteran. I know the Sens haven't really gotten a veteran head coach ever in the past. And a wild stat, since Jacques Martin, no Senators head coach, and they've had a few, Corey Clouston, Craig Hartsburg, Paul McLean, Guy Boucher, has ever been hired as a head coach again afterwards. So, I mean, that kind of tells you a little bit of something. And I mean, it's probably Troy Mann with Belleville. He's had rave reviews, and he's kind of built this core up with the Norris, the Bathersons, the Formentons, all those guys coming up together. So I just don't know how much of a forward move that would be, other than just being kind of a new voice. Because I don't think they're going to bring in a Claude Julien or, a really established veteran coach. Although, Alain Vigneault would be kind of a funny one because he was an assistant coach for Rick Bowness way back in 94. So that'd be kind of funny if they could somehow pull him out. But I think that they would probably lean with the organization they've already got and Troy Mann. So I'm cheering for DJ, though. The players absolutely love playing for him. It's just a matter of, and he was himself a depth defenseman when he was playing, a physical, rugged type. So you saw with the Bruins firsthand, like Josh Brown, he loved Josh Brown in Ottawa. He loves Nikita Zaitsev, Erica Branson. Like, he's got an infinity for the guys who I guess he can relate to and how he played. And the only problem is you can have one of them, but you can't have too many, or else you're just going to be hemmed in your own zone all the time. Right. So that's the one area I'm looking for improvement, is how he utilizes his D-core this season.
And just talking about that, there's been a lot of, I think looking at the Sens, the defense is one big question mark. They obviously are loaded up front. They got the goalie tandem. Is there still the possibility of maybe making a deal for a guy like Jacob Chychrun before the season begins, or are they going to kind of rely on the guys that they have and hope for, stepping up from a guy like Eric Brandstrom or some of these younger guys that have yet to establish themselves?
I mean, Pierre Dorion has made it clear, if the right deal comes along, he'll pull the trigger. And if we're talking about pulling the trigger, he's basically got an empty clip now after the offseason of all the things he pulled the trigger on: trades, free agents, extensions, shipping out bad contracts, all those kinds of things. So if the price is right for Jacob Chychrun, I think absolutely the Ottawa Senators will be in there. I think it's very widely accepted that they're kind of the front runners for Chychrun, at least in rumor mills around the NHL. And the thing is, to get good players, you got to give up good players. And it seems like the Arizona Coyotes are focused on Shane Pinto, and that is someone that Ross and I basically have as an untouchable. He's going to be an incredible two-way pivot, third-line center. And
Patrice Bergeron-esque.
we've heard Patrice Bergeron thrown in there. But that's the thing, like, the Senators have locked up Josh Norris. They've locked up Tim Stützle. They don't have to sign Pinto to a 7 or 8 year deal, but if they can get him on a longer term, if you can have your top 3 centers all in their early 20s signed for a good amount of time, a lot of successful teams build through the middle, and I think that's what the Ottawa Senators are looking for. But defense wins champions as well, and defense wins championships, I should say, as well. So there's definitely work to be done there. So at some point, the Sens are going to have to make a decision. Can we give up these prospects that we've held so dearly and that our fans love and there's so much hope for, to get a guy that's ready right now? And I think personally the move is more likely to happen at the deadline, Ian. I've kind of echoed that. I think that's when the market shifts. You get different prices. You see where the Senators are at, if they're ready to make that investment. So for me, I think it's going to be okay up until then. But if that price goes down on Chychrun, which it might now due to a couple things, him publicly saying he wants to be traded, the team wants to trade him. That kind of changes the leverage there. And the massive news coming out just recently that the NHL salary cap is going to be going up considerably in the next couple of years. I believe it in the third year is when it really takes a jump. So that's when you can start looking at your team and being like, okay, we have a forecast where we can fit a bunch more money into this situation. So I think definitely the defense is what needs upgraded. It's just when is the right time to do that.
Right.
And I think the X factor in all this is the Alex Formenton situation with Hockey Canada. We're still not sure at the time of recording. We have no update, but of course he was on that World Junior team. He also doesn't have a contract, and he was also kind of replaced. I mean, on a 1-year deal, but Tyler Mott can come in, and he was wearing an A in preseason already, and they seem to like him quite admirably. And to me, like Formenton plus is better than Shane Pinto plus, because I just think that he's the coach's dream. Like he's only played 17 NHL games, and I know it's not all him, but that was a bad Ottawa team he came up to in the COVID shortened year. They went 12-2-1 down the stretch with him in the lineup. Like he's got this it factor to him, and some fans bought his North Dakota jersey, so it would be pretty disrespectful for them to move on from him. But no, all jokes aside, like Shane Pinto, and this can actually kind of lead into the tease for our third segment is X factor players and breakout candidates and sleepers. To me, Shane Pinto could be an X factor on this Ottawa Senators team. Who does Pilsy think will be a Sens X factor, and who's a sleeper? We're going to get Ian McLaren's take on some Bruins that might be available a little later on in your fantasy draft, but you should pull the trigger if you can. All that coming up on a crossover edition of the Locked On Senators and Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. All right, you're listening to a crossover edition of Locked On Senators with Locked On Bruins. Ian McLaren's with me. I'm Ross Levitan alongside Brandon Pillar. We've covered the Bruins, we've covered the Sens, and now it's time to look at some individuals who could make a big impact. I've already led the way with Shane Pinto. Ian, who's a guy where the success of the Bruins hinges on his production?
It's a guy I haven't mentioned yet. We've talked about Bergeron, Pastrnak, Marchand, obviously, the big guys, Kreichi. But I think you need to look at a guy like Taylor Hall, who could be a real X factor for this team. That second line of Hall, Kreichi, Pastrnak could arguably be the number one producing line for the Bruins this season. One of the better second lines you'll find around. And, last season, Hall and Pastrnak played together. They really developed some really good chemistry, and it was to the point where I was saying it didn't really matter who played down the middle with them because Taylor Hall has some playmaking ability and Pastrnak has the finish. Now you have a guy like Kreichi who can put the puck in the net on his own. He is a pretty good playmaker as well. So you have those three guys coming down. Pastrnak commands a lot of attention. Might have Taylor Hall open on the left side. There's going to be some options there. So he'll have a better center who can get him the puck. He's, not going to blow you away with goal totals per se, but I could see him, easily. I think I saw on the Athletics fantasy projections, they had him producing fewer goals and points than he did last season, and that just blew my mind. I don't see how that's possible. I can see him maybe not hitting the levels that he did when he was league MVP, but certainly, challenging for 25 goals, 45 assists perhaps, and having a nice 70-point season. And that's a guy that kind of forgotten in the grand scheme of things, and you'll be able to draft him in most fantasy leagues, mid, maybe even late round pick. So don't sleep on Taylor Hall, I don't think.
Yeah, that's a good call. I probably am sleeping on him because I'm still mad about that rumored trade 1-for-1 for Cody Ceci from years ago. and they just didn't get ownership approval in time. Next thing you know, he's sent to New Jersey for Adam Larson, 1-for-1 there. So I'm still mad about that. But yeah, he obviously brings a ton of speed, and with that can open up space for David Pastrnak and that lethal release that we touched on in the first segment. I like that call, Ian. Pilsy, when you look at the Bruins team before getting to Ottawa, who's the guy that you have circled as a guy who you're nervous about when they play the Sens?
Well, the one guy I'm really circling is David Kreichi. You mentioned it, Ian. He's going to be in between Taylor Hall and Pastrnak here. Like, those are two lethal guys. However, it's been a while since he's been back in the NHL. He missed 2 seasons, right?
It was just the one season. He played
just
back
the one?
in Czechia. Yeah.
Okay, so he's coming back to the NHL. No Marchand. Things are going to be looking a little different than the Bruins. He left. So I'm going to be interested to see how his return to the NHL goes. Sure, he's David Kreichi. He's still a great player. And when you have wingers like that, but he is getting up there in age, and this league is becoming more and more a young man's game with speed and skill being the name of it. So that's a guy that, for me, I think you could probably get a little later in fantasy drafts because people forget that he's coming back. And anytime you're in between a guy like Taylor Hall and then David Pastrnak, that's going to be massive, especially Pasta in a contract year.
Yeah.
He's going to be looking to light it up.
Yeah, no doubt. 9 points in 11 playoff games before he took off. So the production was still there. 44 points in 51 games. The goal totals are way down, but still producing. And I don't think he's going to have to be the trigger man on a line with those two guys there. So exactly. I like that as well. So the Bruins' second line getting some love there, if you want to call it that. But I think whoever Patrice Bergeron is playing with, that's the first line by default in my books. All right, Pilsy, the Ottawa Senators, your X factor coming into this upcoming season.
I'm going to keep it consistent, Ross. My X factor for the other crossover shows has been Drake Batherson. I think this is someone that people outside of the Sens fans, they kind of forget because he had that long injury. He was the Ottawa Senators named All-Star before he got injured, unfortunately. And he finished off the season with 44 points in 46 games. Basically a point-per-game guy. He's slated to stay on that top line with Brady Tkachuk, Josh Norris, and then Drake Batherson. He's probably going to play top power play minutes. Like, this guy is just poised, if he can stay healthy, to have another amazing season. And I think when you get the DeBrinkets, the Stutzlas, the Norrises, all those other guys, he kind of gets lost in the shuffle. So that's someone that I think is going to have a massive impact for the Ottawa Senators and could be a real steal in fantasy drafts.
Yeah, and another guy who's just starting to scratch the surface. And if you look at every level he's played at, the second year, he just takes off. Like in the AHL, the second year he was there, unbelievable. And you could say it's his third year, but he played 20 games or so the first one, and it was under Guy Boucher, so that doesn't even count. And then you get what you saw in that shortened season, and then Aaron Dell. I don't know if you remember that play in the middle of last year. It was just a brutal knee on knee in a weird spot, and he got turned around behind the net. And
not even a knee on knee. Aaron Dell legitimately went out of his way and checked him outside of I think it was even outside of the trapezoid there. Not a hockey play whatsoever, and it ends up in a
high
bad
ankle
injury.
sprain too, and that's just a brutal injury to recover from. So he was at a point per game, if not a little bit ahead of it beforehand, and it was tough for him when he got back. And we should mention as well, he was on that World Junior team, and there's no update about what's going on there. He is under contract, and one of the steals in the league, I'd say, signed under $5 million for the next 4 seasons. And if the cap's going up, and that looks more like a 3.54 million, that's unreal value for a guy who can play make. He can kill penalties when he has to. His player comparable when he did the draft thing was Mark Stone when he was way younger, and you see a little bit of that. I want to see him take another step defensively this year, but active stick on the defensive side, and he's grown 4 inches since his draft too, so that's obviously allowed him to protect pucks better along the boards. But Pilsy, I like that for you. As we wrap up, Ian, your final prediction, are the Bruins still a playoff team? And if so, are they the wild card, or do you think they could challenge one of the big dogs in Tampa, Toronto, and Florida?
I think they are still a playoff team. I think once they're healthy, they're arguably better than they were last year. You flip Holla for Kreichi, second line center, huge upgrade. Pavel Zacha, I think, can bring some nice skill. He's going to probably be on the third line once Brad Marchand comes back, so that will be a benefit to them. I look around the Atlantic and I see, Ottawa, Detroit moving up a bit. I see Florida taking a step back this season, I think. They're not as good as they were last year. Toronto, their situation in net. John Tavares going to be injured to start the season. I don't think they're a sure thing. Top 3, top 4 for sure, but, they're Toronto, so they'll always figure out a way to mess things up. I could see Boston probably sticking in that wild card spot again this season. I could see them sneaking into the top 3, Florida moving down a bit, maybe Tampa, because they won't necessarily have the gas on in the regular season. They know that if they can get in the playoffs, they have a team that can go far. They can beat Toronto in Game 7 on home ice or in Toronto.
I mean, anyone could do that, though.
Yeah, exactly. So I can see the Bruins sneaking into the 3rd spot, perhaps. But definitely, I have no no question that they're still a playoff team in my mind, especially when healthy.
I got this so fast on the trigger here. If anyone's watching on YouTube, we pulled this up with almost every division preview we've done, and we got to ask you the same question, Ian. Who in this Leaf pile is your favorite with the emotion on their face? There's lots to choose from.
I'm going to go with the guy on the left, 2nd row, the glasses. On his head there.
Yeah, he looks like he's seen God.
He's about ready to keel over, I think.
Do you guys have a nice relationship with Tampa Bay Lightning since you've handed the torch off to them as the team that disjoints the Leafs in round 1?
I mean, I don't root for the Lightning. It's tough to see a team that good. I mean, it's nice to see them beat Toronto, but they beat the Bruins a couple of years prior to that in the 2nd round, and I'd like to see another team kind of take the mantle in the Eastern Conference for sure.
It would have been more, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I'd be more on board if Steve Yzerman was still the general manager. Pride in Nepean, Ontario.
Yes, sir.
He was one of my favorites growing up, so I would have rooted for him maybe, but not the Lightning so much.
Nice, Bills. You got something?
What do you think is the best path for the Ottawa Senators to make the playoffs? Do you think they need to find a way to bounce a team out of the Atlantic, or in my opinion, I think it's going to be bouncing a team out of the Metro? Do you think that's kind of the more likely path here?
Yeah, I could see that where it's a 5-3 split between the Atlantic and the Metro. There's a couple upstart teams in the Metro that I could see challenging, like, the New Jersey Devils, always expected to make a bit of a jump. I think Jack Hughes is going to be massive this season. They got some goaltending going on for them, but I could see Washington taking a step back.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh, they're not getting any younger. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's any really sure things in the Metro besides the Hurricanes and probably the Rangers. Yeah. Other than that, it's pretty wide open, I think. So yeah, I could see a team like Ottawa grabbing that 2nd wildcard spot and beating out one of those more established teams. It doesn't have to just be Boston. Everybody's focusing on Ottawa catching, Boston or whatever. But yeah, that Metro crossover can't be discounted either.
And Ian is really warming himself up to Sens fans as we did our Locked On NHL uniform polls. And what'd you say Ottawa was? Top 3 for you?
I love Ottawa's jerseys, yeah. I mean, Going from the old one to the one they have now, it's night and day. I grew up in Ottawa, love the old look, love the 2D logo. I think it's, the black with the 2D logo. And those heritage jerseys that they rocked a few years ago as well were beautiful.
The black ones or the red ones?
The black ones, just
the
with
more
the
black.
O there. Yeah, those are beautiful. So yeah, I would say they're top 3 for me for sure. Those jerseys, I love them.
Hell yeah. Well, we love having you on. We also love that the regular season is just around the corner. The Ottawa Senators home opener is against the Boston Bruins, so we'll be sure to touch base with you around that time, get a little crossover action going throughout the season.
For sure.
before, during, and after that, you can always subscribe to Locked On Bruins wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Same can be said for the Locked On Senators podcast. For Ian McLaren and Brandon Pillar, I'm Ross Levitan. This has been another edition of the Locked On Atlantic Division preview right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.